biggest shift was that you have to build things for other people who are joining in. So everything was new, and you're stepping into something, and people who are joining you are going to expect that from you.
Another big change was, of course, the salary coming in. Like this huge check that used to come at the end of the month, that was your responsibility. Not only the employees, but even yours. And you cannot be unpaid because it has to be a sustainable business running on its own. So that was a big change.
I think funding, if you are using it as a tool to cover up mistakes, that will be completely wrong. Funding has to be only when you're seeing it a real good scale or a growth, because at the end of the day, it's just a promise, right? We are seeing growth. Are you willing to invest in it? And let's grow together.
It's a little out of the box that I'm asking. How does it feel to be the boss lady?
Amazing. I've always wanted that.
Today on Fortune India's The Disruptors podcast, we are talking about a brand that quietly changed how a generation looks at saris. What started in 2016 as a personal idea between two sisters have grown into a 75 crore bootstrap business with close to 20 stores across India and a deeply loyal community. Suta didn't just sell saris, it reimagined them as everyday wear, scaling without venture capital while staying rooted in craft and storytelling. Hi, I'm Debanjana Majumdar, and joining me today are Sujata Biswas and Tanya Biswas, the co-founders of Suta. We talk about leaving corporate careers, building a profitable business without external funding, navigating offline expansion and dealing with plagiarism, and what it takes to build something long-term in India's fashion and retail space. This is a conversation about business and about patience and conviction and choosing your own pace of growth. Thank you so much, Sujata. Thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us today here in Fortune India's The Disruptors podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. We're extremely happy to be here and having this conversation today.
And I'm really excited to have this conversation with both of you. I mean, this is also something very personal to me, because the way I used to look at saris, the way I used to see saris, it all also changed because for the both of you. So I want to start from the very beginning. You both, moved from being, engineers and MBAs to building a 75 crore, business, right? So when you look back, what was the biggest mindset shift that you, saw in leaving a structured corporate, roles and stepping into entrepreneurship?
Actually, there was a huge change. I am sure anybody who's moving from a structured setup to any unstructured setup, this is what the problem is, that you have to think of everything from scratch. And in corporate, everything is served to you in a nice platter. Even if there are roles and responsibilities, KPIs defined, this is how you should go, somebody is telling you, watching over. But when you're starting on something, you don't know the departments, you don't know what you're supposed to do, nobody's telling you. So the biggest shift was that you have to build things for other people who are joining in. So everything was new, and you're stepping into something, and people who are joining you are going to expect that from you. So the whole role reversal happens, and the whole mindset shift was like a big thing for us. Yeah.
And another big change was, of course, the salary coming in. Like this huge check that used to come at the end of the month, that was your responsibility. Not only the employees, but even yours. And you cannot be unpaid because it has to be a sustainable business running on its own. So that was a big change.
When that you mentioned, when the check that at the end of the month, most people, if they want to start something, they always think about, what's going to happen, that if that monthly, whatever the monthly income that I'm getting, if I don't get that, how am I going to sustain that? So didn't that scare you?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it did scare us. Why? Because we started in 2014, unofficially with a pilot project. For 2 years, we did this on a weekend. Wherever we used to be in Surat or Hyderabad, we used to come back to Mumbai and do this on the weekend to see if there's actually a demand. And when we saw the demand was much higher than the supply was, so we realized that, this has to run. It is successful. I don't know how big it can become, but definitely this idea is successful. So we have to build a supply chain. And when we realized in 2016, in April 1st, that we can draw a salary of 20,000 each, And that was okay for us to sustain with our savings. That's the time we quit. We paid ourselves 20,000 each and one employee and 2 weavers for the work we gave them. And we saw that this can continue over for 1 year, and that made sense.
Yeah, but I'll tell you honestly, that 20,000, telling your parents that look, we're going to draw on 20,000 instead of a few lakhs, and then they were like, looking at it and thinking, what happened? You know, how did you take a call which is, do you have a number backing? We didn't know the demand, how it's going to be. So we only had to go in deep to understand what it is. So yeah.
Yeah, again, making the parents understand that, okay, I'm leaving my job. It's a big deal. You have spoken about, weavers, and you've spoken about craft. So at what point did you realize that this could become like not just a passion project, but also a very scalable business?
We took some time to understand this, because when we entered, this was, anyway, sari market itself is unstructured, but weaving community is even more unstructured. You don't know who is working with who. There's no structured setup in many places. So for us, it took us a lot of time to understand that, A. And then later on to understand how to scale it, because when Tanya mentioned that supply was lower than the demand, we couldn't make sense of it. We were just making sure that whatever we are saying, the people's understanding and is able to supply it. And then when we realized we can scale is actually during COVID. Till COVID, a lot of reluctance was there from a lot of big weavers saying, we already have a structured setup, we supply to this store, we supply to this brand. We don't want to work with newcomers. We don't know what will happen with you, so we don't want to join you. So we were always working with a very small setup. But what happened in COVID is there was this huge job loss that happened, sadly, right? I think the brick and mortar stores, the stores were shutting down.
Yeah.
And then the weavers had just left, were left with so much inventory that they didn't know who to go to. So we got a lot of call during COVID saying, दीदी अगर आप आज मेरा सामान नहीं लोगे, मेरे घर में खाना बंद हो जाएगा एक हफ्ते बाद. That sort of calls. And then we realized, even if we started placing orders with them, and we started getting photos from them and started posting, saying, we haven't designed it. We have taken things from the weavers as is because we liked it. If you want to order. So customers started placing orders just by looking at the story, the beautiful craftsmanship. And with that's when we realized this is how you will scale. When you start working on the supply side of it and you start building inventory and then you project it in a proper way, like proper storytelling, telling about the craft, there are customers who are going to willing to buy. And that's when we realize scaling is, with great power comes great responsibility. It's Spider-Man dialogue, but then it is. Yeah. We realize that, this is the best time for us to scale.
And honestly, we didn't have to touch wood, fire anyone during that time. Even if we didn't know if orders are going to come, we had a good saving because we always were very frugal, and we always worked upon profitability, making sure there's a good cash in hand. That made us grow really well during COVID, and we were not spending randomly here and there, and we could actually give work to weavers at a time when we didn't know if markets will open and when we'll be able to ship. We told the customers that you can place order, but I'm not sure when I'm going to ship this, but they did. That's how community is made, that's how they trusted us. Then we realized we can grow, and this is unstoppable.
Yeah, it sounds like it sounds like a family. It's, you guys are very tied to each other. And I think this also, as you mentioned, happened during COVID.
Yeah.
So rather than falling apart, you guys came together and built something really substantial and beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Suta has stayed, bootstrapped. It has, at a time when many D2C fashion brands, they have raised large rounds of funds, right? So what did, staying unfunded allow you to do things differently? And what did it genuinely, slow things down for you?
I think what we did differently was the creative freedom that we had. And we could implement all the wild ideas we had. I think innovation was the key for this brand, the way we innovated products. I think if you asked me how many pieces you'll sell, I would either say 100 or 5. It was that extreme because you had no idea. Nobody was doing things like this. And the second thing is that the way the weaver setup is, if you ask how will you optimize it, if I was a consultant like before, I would say bring them together under one roof, give them better equipments, upgrade the looms a bit more, and bring them here so that quality is better. You can track their work. So when you say the lead time is this 60 days, it doesn't go to 80 days, right? Because you're controlling it, you're watching it. But that's not what the weavers want. They like their home setup. The whole family is involved. The wife, mothers, the daughter, sister, everyone weaves the same sari. When they get up from the loom, somebody else sits and then starts weaving it. They cook, they also do farming. It's very fluid. They don't want that to change. We suggested that once, but nobody wanted it. But if I say that I will stop working with you, just come here, it might happen. But I think that's changing the essence of how weaving works. So this freedom to sustain like this, to make sure that we are okay with it, will not happen.
But I'll tell you honestly, one more thing is that a lot of people tell us that investors might not change this. It might not, right? Again, because the moment, if you're growing, great. If you're not growing, or if you're doing something really wrong and something is not working out, it could be something that needs fixing even before we go for funding. So I think funding, if you are using it as a tool to cover up mistakes, that will be completely wrong. Funding has to be only when you're seeing it a real good scale or a growth, because at the end of the day, it's just a promise, right? We are seeing growth. Are you willing to invest in it? And let's grow together. But unless we see that scale, I don't think we should go for funding, and that's what we have always been constantly talking about and been sticking to that. And the second question is very interesting. That what did we not do or couldn't do? Is that fashion cycle is so cyclical that there are times that there are lean times, lean months when we want to do production and keep, but because of funds we are unable to do it, and especially that happens during June, July. When there's rains. The weavers can't weave, but before that we have to build, but their cycles are very low, that then sales are not too high. And that time we have to prepare for the festivities. I think those kind of time, we could have taken maybe a much more drastic or big call about production, which we don't. I don't know whether it's right or wrong. If it could be right, if it's really, really like a booming sale we have, and that's only like opportunity cost, we don't even know. And if we never try, we'll also not know, right? It could have been a really big game changer for us, and we could have been maybe a 500 crore brand by now. So... yeah,
and which I'm sure will happen. But do you see yourself, getting funded anytime soon or in the future?
We never say no to that. That's why we said the moment we see that the money will come and we can actually scale, the promise is real, we both agree to it, or the whole company is aligned towards it, why not? It's never a no for us. It's just that this is not the right time. We never felt that it's a time to scale in that pace. And we are happy with a 20 store by now, but like maybe we are not ready for a 50 or a 100. The moment we see that the system is set where we can scale that up, maybe
understanding that retail, the way we have been doing since 2.5 years, is working really, because 2.5 years is very small time. It's like a startup on its own. And if you're sure that whatever we have cracked is real, 100 stores maybe. But again, having said that, we also have investors in terms of customers investing in us as franchisee partners. So that's also a kind of an investment that we have. Their buy-ins, the risks they have taken along with us. So yeah.
It's a very interesting way of looking into things. How does it feel to be the boss lady?
Amazing. I've always wanted that. I've had lady bosses, women as bosses, and I've always looked up to them. People taking calls, taking shots, calling to meetings. It's amazing to see them. And I've always fantasized all these women characters in movies who are taking calls. So it's great, because we have always seen this narrative where women have been wearing a sari, sitting in a corner crying, or a sari person, but women in saris being the boss ladies is like it's a narrative thing, right? It's said those Bombay Begums, right? Pooja Bhatt was like in the room and doing all of that. So I feel the whole fact that we are also part of that narrative when women taking shots, women leading big brands, enterprises. We have a lot of role models, but I think India needs much more. So
yeah, truly.
Yeah.
And I think India is walking towards that path as well. Yes. Looking at both of you is another big example too. So, your revenue has hovered around 73 to 75 crore mark, and you have often spoken about profits narrowing because of the aggressive retail or your offline expansion. So, looking back, what were some decisions in the last 2 years that did not work the way you wanted it to work, and what has that taught you? And what was that expectation that you had but didn't happen?
A lot of things going wrong, honestly. I think that if we were to pinpoint couple, we'll just talk about it. But yeah, but the thing about hovering over that number also is also because we were restructuring internally. And it also is a lot of mistakes that we were correcting. So we'll talk about the mistakes next. And for this year, we have actually, our profit margins have increased a lot. So I think that was a real, like for us, a lot of learning during this time to understand the importance of scale. For example, the mistake that we did is never understanding how to relook at our terms. We always assume that because our business has grown with a company, they would just automatically reduce the costs. But no, we have to ask for it, So that is a big mistake. When the moment you scale, the whole negotiation power of a brand changes drastically, and not realizing that, not talking to everybody. It could be logistics partners to the packaging material to everything. The whole cost structures need to be revised and relook at maybe on a quarterly basis or even a half-yearly basis. But those kind of things we never did earlier. So we just grew and we kept not looking at it. That's a big mistake of not looking at your own structures that you've created, not looking at your own decisions that you've made. You should go back the moment.
Yeah, at scale, things change.
Yeah.
That realization came to us a little late. And also processes, to revisit processes. One more thing we did little wrong was that I think when you hire a key resource, hiring fast and also firing fast is necessary for a company, because if you give a lot of time, I'm not saying about everyone, but the key resources you need at the time of growth. And if it is not working out, realizing it quickly between the two of you, in the employee and employer, is very, very necessary. Because if you give a lot of time, understanding, so assuming that it'll work or it may work out, it failed for us for a couple of roles. The team suffers, the team reporting to them, the teams working with them suffers, and that also happened with us. There are signals which you tend to ignore, I feel, and as a brand during growth, I think these are the things that you need to look at, especially the key roles when there are literally like the cogs in the wheel which is controlling a lot of things, and those hiring going wrong could be detrimental to the business. And yeah, those are the two mistakes. Yeah, these are the two biggest ones which probably could have worked out better.
Yeah, I mean, they probably learn too much about the business and they start doing their own.
No, there were new hires for critical roles. Okay. I think we could have taken the decision quick enough to understand that it's not working, because we put a lot of burden on them, right? We put a lot of KPIs on them, like this is a responsibility, but not questioning ourselves that have we done it right? Are they the right people? Have we hired? And also me and Sujata leaving that bit completely and looking at growth or being the face of the brand, looking at marketing more, and leaving those certain key resources on their own, not guiding them properly. Probably that also could have gone wrong. But I think just understanding if that position has been filled right, fill it fast, also empty it faster if it's not working out, not holding on to it saying that, oh, I will make it work, etc. So things go kind of wrong, and kind of a lot of other roles can work like that, not the key ones.
Definitely. I mean, if that person, and also you, as you said, that a lot of things you guys model for your own, sites and handle almost everything by yourself, which also puts a lot of burden on the both of you. I don't know how you manage it.
We have a great team. We have a great, wonderful team.
You have spoken, very, very openly about growing for, years on just instinct and gut. And then you there was a point that you hit where the numbers were forced to reset. So today, which metrics do you look, most closely before, you want to take the decision of expanding further?
The biggest one is that we look at P&Ls individually. Now we look at even a small step, even if it's a launch or if it's an exhibition we are doing or it's an expansion plan, we do pilots and we look at the P&L. So for everything we have, numbers where we see the top line and the bottom line and the profits. So if it doesn't work out, take a call right at the beginning to not go ahead, because the more, just by instincts or gut, if you didn't have the numbers at the right time and not looking at it, you could be taking something completely wrong or just assuming that it is working, whereas actually in the end, it's not working. So profits is something that you need to be always on top of, because that's something that you might miss in in that whole gut and the passion, and you say, I'm so driven that I'm going to make this work and this collection should be bestseller, but your sell-through rate should tell you that no, it's actually not selling at the pace that you expected. So
Yeah,
you
also
should be on
like
top of numbers.
pop-ups that we are constantly doing within India and also internationally. We look at just that pop-up and us understanding whether it's actually giving you revenue or you're just expanding your customer base. You have to understand and then make a plan and not just expand. So when we were smaller, it was okay because it was just one at a time. When you're bigger, we're looking at Australia, we're going to Mauritius, we're going to so many different countries that if it fails, you fall flat on your face because there's no getting out. It'll take time for you to get up. So because it's a massive company we're running and it can't move fast, it's not agile anymore. So that's why P&L is what we look at.
Yeah,
and it just
and
makes sense.
every level of it. For example, you should have an inventory, just looking at inventory in just as inventory and also in totality, how is it adding or subtracting from the whole thing. So just looking at every aspect. So for example, I was talking about let's say an online business. So online business, what is the biggest cost? So advertisement comes as the biggest cost. So just looking at it keenly, and even when it comes to retail, operations cost is very, very high. So every P&L will have its own problematic areas. So just highlighting that and just keeping an eye on it so that the check is always maintained. You have your own checks. So I think that's what is something that we've learned.
Earlier, it was just flying in. Let's just do it. Like gut.
Ye hai, ye man kare, chalo, let's just.
Sujata, yes. She'll be like, yes. Oh, let's do it. It was like mostly that.
Okay, so it's like, abhi kar sakte hai. We can do this also, that also. Let's. But now you're a little more, paced out. Okay, we have to think through. Okay, so just asking, how big is the market for you internationally? Like, what is the kind of order that you see from the international markets currently?
So the whole online business contributes to 45% of our total revenue, and out of which 10% comes from international. So it's a big market, whereas we haven't really mindfully put our heads and heart to marketing internationally, which is now going to start. So we are going to start this year. We are planning our first international store this year. So along with that, we're also planning like a lot of pop-ups, which will give us an idea about whether this geography makes sense for us. And we also positioning ourselves as a brand which is maybe celebrating not just sari as an attire, but also the Indian craft, the fabric and all of that. So I think there is a lot of potential in the international markets. We are slowly going in and starting marketing and awareness about the product.
Nice. I mean, there's a lot to look forward to then. Yeah. So it's just in the couple of years, it's going to be a lot coming from Suta then.
Yeah, it's exciting because there's so much to do, so many places to go to.
Definitely. Fingers crossed. So you operate with separate P&Ls, as you said, for online, for offline store, for marketplaces, for exhibitions. So among all these channels, currently, which one gives you the clearest path to profitable growth over the next, few years?
Honestly, online as in I'm saying about website and app is 45. 20% comes from marketplace. 35% is retail, which we are seeing growing very fast. And also, I feel that the AOV increases. Repeat customers are coming. It's larger. And also, I see that there's not much cannibalization of online and offline. So there's a different customer base who's waiting to touch and feel and buy. So that's only there to grow. Yeah. And a store which keeps staying there for a very long time, it just keeps growing on its own without pushing or putting in too much. So I think offline way is what we're looking at. This year we are looking at how many more? 15 more stores. So touch wood. The coming financial year, 15 more stores. Yeah. And honestly, we look at individual channels, as I mentioned, and all of them need to be profitable. Otherwise, it won't make sense for us. So, but scalability to increase the top line, I think offline is a very clear path. We are also looking at international as one of a completely different channels. So yeah, that will slowly, it'll unfold. Yeah.
Truly. I mean, and also when you talk about international, because a lot of Indians, they go abroad, they want to wear sari, and I have a couple of friends of mine who actually have gone abroad. They keep on, they come, whenever they come, they just buy a lot of, saris and all. They pack it and so there is a huge demand for it. Like people who in, abroad, they have started celebrating Indian festivals also in a very larger way. So there also the demand is growing. So yeah, I mean, as you also mentioned, that 15 more stores to look at this year. I mean, the coming financial year. I mean, really looking. It's something to look forward to. So, you said that retail. It felt like starting an entirely new business, right? So, what surprised you the most when when you saw the interaction with the consumers with offline as compared to online? So what was the difference that did you see?
So there's a lot of difference, honestly. So some of the bestsellers which are online is not necessarily offline, and it's the vice versa is true. And the customer behavior offline is, so online when you come to search, it's a very pointed approach. So for example, I want a black sari, and the range should be 3-4K, and I know straight, search for this, I'll get it and I'll buy. Online is not a lot about browsing, though. If your website is really nice, people will spend a lot of time. So that's a very it's a different mind. Maybe if somebody has really a lot of time, but when it comes to offline, people go for browsing. People go for the whole experience, and and hence the average order value for online is 4,500 for us. Offline is around 6,800. So there's a that anyway the math says it all, but the way people touch and feel experience, and the store manager playing a lot of role, or the store team or the stylist playing a lot of role in influencing, styling you, giving you tips, helps a lot, whereas in online you can't do it. Even if there is chatbots and all of that, this physical thing cannot be replicated, or cannot be replaced by online. So I feel offline, the experience matters a lot more than when it comes to online shopping. And yeah, the lot can be done in an offline space. Yeah, and also the blouses, once you see yourself wearing it and you see the fit, and people don't stop at one. Yeah. And that's what is retail. People don't stop at one. They buy a lot more, and they keep coming back. So that's a beauty of retail. And also sari as a garment, people have started online shopping it very recently. And I also think that it started a lot with us, starting in 2016, that people started buying online. But when we see retail, people said, "Oh, I've been waiting for you touch and feel your fabric because I've been a fan of your brand but never bought." So these people sitting on the fence, they converted like this, and like how LTV is much higher. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a child, I used to go with my mom for sari shopping. After school, she used to take me, and that sitting over there, that let me the store manager used, and let me show you this one, let me show you that one. So by looking at it, she probably went for one, but she bought like 2-3.
Yeah.
And then she's distributing among the relatives also. So I think that kind of thing also, touch and feel, helps.
Yeah, it does.
And the kind of quality, the kind of saris that I mean, that's a very normal way of, because you are not selling just saris which are heavy on you or something that is too hard to carry. The kind of material is also very soft and it's easy and
felt.
Exactly.
People might not understand if they're seeing it online.
Yeah, because people might just see the price and see this. It's a single color sari. Why would someone go for it? But when they come for the touch and feel, okay, this is something I can carry on an everyday basis, and not just for a function, or because most of the time, as I mentioned before also, most of the time people should just think about saris like that only. Ki, I'll go to this function. So for this function, I need 4 saris. I'm going to buy that much only. But now the kind of way you have imagined saris as an everyday wear, that entire story has changed. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of this contribution comes from, the both of your effort.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, the touch and feel, of course, when the person will touch the material of your sari only, they will obviously keep on buying it. They will know your sari.
Exactly. So when people buy or wear one sari and they think that, okay, I can have only one of the solids,
And when they step out, the way they feel and the kind of compliments they receive from any gender.
I think
Compliment
compliment
comes because our saris don't interfere too much with your style. So if you are, however you are, you don't have to be like, you know, you're not doing too much to fit into it. The garment just wraps you the way you are, and it's not taking away a lot from you. So it lets you be yourself and not pretending to be somebody else. It's not that. So it's very flowy. Saris itself are like that, but with the malmal, being like feels like a very second skin kind of fabric. So it just feels nice. And people do get a lot of compliments when they wear a suta sari. Yeah, they keep coming back and saying that I got so many compliments. I need all the colors of this malmal. So that's the beauty of it. Once you wear it, you know, and that's what happens at stores. You drape it and you're like, oh, wow, what's this?
Exactly. I know about the compliments or two. Yeah, I know this is not just a myth; it's actually a fact. So when you just started with saris, right? Now you have around 5,000 SKUs. So and it is across apparels, it is across menswear, kidswear, home. So how do you decide then what to scale, especially when expansion, can dilute things, dilute focus in the process?
We do not launch anything for just the sake of just creating another vertical, you know, or another product line. We do it when we see honestly that there's a gap and we can fill that in, and we offer value with that product. So every product has been launched like that. Though I feel that we haven't scaled it enough because we are completely focused on saris and blouses. But even in this small collections that we have, they have done extremely well. And we want to grow it very organically, slowly, not pushing in money and making it bigger than it just can become. And if it has the potential to become a brand on its own, we will branch it out. So there's nothing sort of diluting it because the essence is the same. The fabric, the quality, the feel, everything stays the same. We of course see that we offer value in terms of large pockets that you really, really want, plus menswear, which again feels great on the skin. People have bought one and they have gotten all the colors of the same shirt. So it's the same with men and women. So we want to offer that. But having this dilution question is not unfair to ask because a lot of men have said that I wouldn't enter a suta assuming I'm going to buy a shirt. You know, if I'm walking it with a woman and then she's buying something, I might pick this shirt and then if I like, I'll buy more. So that could be one of the reasons, and hence we feel sometimes that, you know, like that's why funding could have made us make more sense. Or if we are able to, take out the profit and distribute it properly amongst all the categories, that would make more sense. If menswear, we don't focus. We don't. Our focus really gets like pulled to saris and blouses, and there is potential. And hence, Sane said it right that organically we are seeing, and if it has, maybe this year we are focusing a lot on menswear because we saw a beautiful growth journey of men's. It's called Adam Me. Or also Admi.
So, your saris, they start at around 1,500. So, which makes suta accessible, but also puts, pressure on margins. So, how do you balance paying, weavers fairly and keeping the prices also reasonable and still running a very sustainable business?
That was hard. In the beginning, I remember we had this constant discussion about, how much the pricing should be. Are we able to give discounts at all, which we were not used to giving in the beginning when we started. And all of that discussion happened. But one thing was constant, that weavers' money is not going to get compromised. So there, the weavers anyway with us get paid a little more than the market rate that happens because we are very strict with quality. So they have to invest more time to make sure that there are less defects, right? There are minimal defects, and even if there are defects, they have to be highlighted and stuff like that. So we have very, very strict quality control rules, and that was a non-negotiable. We'll never do anything of that, cut corners in quality. But having said that, we innovated a lot in terms of design and also scale. For example, if you make only 10 saris, the costs will go high. But if we are short making sure that the colors are safe colors, or we're betting on this and we make hundreds of them, then the price automatically comes down. So we worked on that, and also making very simpler designs, very, very plain These are
solid,
like
first
first
saree,
few
yeah.
launches, solid sari with a little tassel and a tag. That's it, and that's how we introduce saris. Yeah. In fact, when we started, there were two things that we started with. One is working with weavers directly and creating impact in people's lives, and the second was let's bring saris back. So if we wanted to do that, if we wanted youngsters to buy saris, their own saris, and not just borrow from their elderlies, then they had to be able to afford the sari. And once they wear it and love it, they will buy the other ones and then they invest a little more.
So it was an
So
entry
it has to be
yeah.
1,500 when we started.
So it was an entry level pricing, what we did, and it's very, very simple. We just made it absolutely simple, no brainer, absolutely simple, classic designs which can be worn. And also, once you understand about the fabric, then you are bringing more people in, and it becomes a talking point.
Yeah, like the black t-shirts in your wardrobe. My saris.
Staples.
Yeah, staples. I mean, when you mentioned the black t-shirt, I have so many of them. It's like a same thing, but in many layers. So, also coming to Suta saris, you have the same thing in different colors. I have same Suta sari in different colors.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you should have in your wardrobe. If you have the black t-shirt stack, you should have a Suta sari malmal stack because you just go to them, don't match out, and you'll never be like, your day will become fabulous. You feel sensuous, you feel nice, powerful, and you're just walking the streets getting comfortable.
So, you mentioned about the artisans. So, you have worked with over 17,000 artisans, right? Who depend on you for, on the steady, who depend on you and also on the steady demand. So, how does that responsibility influence your, decisions in when you make the collections? And if those collections, do not perform the way it's supposed to perform, and or how does that slow the pace for you, or create some kind of that this is not going to work out and this is going to work out because it's not selling at the way that it's supposed to sell?
So we have always been an artisanal brand, artisan-focused brand. So when you asked question initially, where do you see 10 years down the line, what will you do? I don't know whether you have the question, but we always measure it in terms of not just revenue, but in terms of artisans. We would want to have 20,000 artisans by this many years. So I think that is the way we look at, because we want to make sure that artisans who were working with us get constant work. So even if they want to work, let's say 3 months with us, the rest of the months they are doing agriculture. But then the 3 months we should be providing them work. Like it's like an unsaid promise. So that is what we've always looked at. So if a collection is a flop with a group, then the next collection we plan it for them. A safer collection, not like a collection which we are not sure about, because we do a lot of innovation. But we don't experiment so much with one group of a cluster of weavers, because we know if we'd have to constantly get them work, and hence we say that it's always an artisan focused brand, and the collections also led by who is free. So
yeah, it's not any trends that we follow, but depending on who is going to need work tomorrow is how our designs and collections are launched.
That's again, just not thinking about yourselves. You're thinking about the people that you're working with. So it's again a very family approach, as you mentioned from the very beginning. The sari market is today, it's a very crowded market, right? So there are a lot of legacy brands and there are also a lot of new brands. And so who are also copying designs. So how do you think about protecting the originality and the brand identity when plagiarism is so common and the legal action has its limits, right? So what do you do?
Initially, we cried seeing someone copy and minting money. Then we have the legal team who started doing trademarking, which became very expensive per design, and we thought that it's not sustainable. Then they started reaching out to these people, and initially we used to say, please pull it down. When they don't listen, we sent legal notices. But then that also became very taxing. Now we have decided that if it's not a big brand, because they would listen, they will understand if they're working professionally. But otherwise, if they're smaller brands and people who don't respond to you, we'll just leave it, not waste our energies, but constantly focus on innovating products so that once they catch up to whatever I've made, I've moved on to something else, something very, very different, unique, innovative, so that they again try to catch up and I'm running. So that way we decide ourselves.
I think
But I think the government should do something about it.
yeah, I think we need a big regulatory push from somebody more powerful than us. You know, we can't spend money, we can't bleed. Or also customers, maybe awareness is something that customers need to have, and it's slowly getting there. You know, we customers are very aware. They feel that, oh, if it's a duplicate of Suta, I will not buy because I know it's a copy, you know, so I will not encourage that. So I know a lot of people who do that, even if you're selling for like giving me 1/3 the price, but I know because Suta ensures quality, I will go buy from Suta. So there are customers like that, but also the market getting so crowded, it's a good thing because now if you see Tata's, Aditya Birla Group, everybody, Reliance, everyone has a brand in sari celebrating crafts. It just shows that the whole market has so much potential.
Yeah.
So I think together maybe it's a movement that maybe the world will start looking at us as sari as an attire which should be celebrated more, and hopefully you'll see more people around the world wearing sari.
You see sari gowns or sari inspired gowns in all the archives, right? So I think together we will just make saris more wild.
So, as you mentioned, you know, saris, bringing change in saris, the way people look at it as well. So, by that, I remember a very funny thing. Now, people wear like saris as dhotis.
Yeah.
So, I have seen that happening. I can't pinpoint or remember, but that guy has like a bun and he has a beard. He's very popular on Instagram. I've seen him.
Bose, is it?
Something.
He and his mother wear saris, right? He drapes it on a sari as like dhoti. Yeah, Rahul Bose.
Yes, somebody, they both do it at the same time also sometimes. So fashion, the way of looking at things is also changing. So
I
this,
think fluidity is more acceptable now.
yeah.
Sari is like a fluid 5.5 meters, 6 meters. So you can do anything with it. Yeah, millions of women wore it on a ramp. Sari, yeah.
It's drew a lot of attention, and honestly, I feel like men should start experimenting, and they have started doing that.
Yeah.
And there's no raising of eyebrows seeing that, because it's just dhoti with the pallu coming like this on a kurta or something, and it looks so beautiful on them. People look handsome. If they want to look beautiful, they look beautiful. It's just acceptable now. Things are changing. I love it.
So many funded competitors are, you know, chasing younger consumers through discounts and heavy, you know, ad spends. So why do you believe in storytelling and community building will work better for, you know, as a performance as compared to, you know, all these heavily invested ads in ethnic wear?
I'll tell you one thing, which is algorithms change. Communities don't, they stay. So that's such a powerful thing to understand, that tomorrow if you put in a lot of money doesn't mean you'll get the same ROAS and you will be able to build. Otherwise everyone would have just put in money and have gone. Building a community is very hard, and it can't be done through just strategizing or constantly changing things, but having your authenticity in place and communicating your original story. People relate to it, and you know, with stories, they keep remembering you. And when they think of a sari or a product that you're making or a blouse, they think of Suta because they remember. But paid ads is just buying once and forgetting, probably, unless you again appear through paid. That's why the more heavy you go, deep down you go, keep showing ads, you will end up burning a lot of money unless the product is really so good or the story is really so strong that it sticks. And especially with the youngsters, Gen Zs, and you know, even the alphas will be coming in soon. So you know, if it's not a story, and because they believe so much in authenticity, if you've seen that the whole idea of heavily photoshopped or, you know, properly shot videos are no more there. It's like a blurred vision or just a phone camera image is working, because it has to talk to them, not just you know, my propaganda which I'm going to say and you have to believe it. It has to be something that I'm connecting to. So I think the whole world is moving towards that. So storytelling will always stay. It's never going to go away. And like a good movie, you'll never forget, right? A story which will always stay with you, a dialogue, because it's beautifully said or beautifully written. And it's something like that. So I think honesty will stay. And yeah, burning money is something that, you know, anyway, we are garib. So and then we're not going to spend like that crazy. We can't just afford to do that.
Nah, storytelling actually truly ties you to the product. So whenever you think about whenever you think about something, you directly go to that product. So it connects you.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that's something to really look at, not just spend too heavily on ads and doing so much of propaganda.
Yeah.
So you now if you looking ahead, so you started Suta back in 2016, and in less than a decade you have built across 20 stores in India. So when you look ahead in the next 10 years, so how do you see the brand expanding further, and how do you are you looking at taking Suta abroad you mentioned one, but more places abroad?
First, like I said that also, that we don't see it like that. We see it as distribution is something that is more celebrated than actually top thinking about the weavers. So we always keep saying that, we would rather work with more craft, involving more. So maybe you'll see this year we'll bring in a lot more crafts from India. Earlier we would just focus on one, going deep, scaling. But now we are looking at broadening our horizon to make sure Indian craftsmanship is celebrated across our platform. So we will do that if you're going to see that. And the plan of abroad, so that's what I'm saying. We keep focusing on a lot of things. What will click, we are not yet sure. But online is e-com is international is something that we never really put our heads and hearts to. But now through a lot of exhibitions and traveling and actually going and meeting customers, and also a lot of very, very good partnerships, we are looking at actually figuring out whether it is a market for us. So people I know are buying online, but physically we are not yet sure. But hopefully it's going to be opening up doors if it does click well.
And honestly, we will not only be targeting or be welcoming just the Indian consumer, because saris, they know how to wear. I want to introduce saris to the world, but it may not happen very fast. So to offer the same fabric, malmal, we will have a lot of products which is malmal, for them to experience the fabric and the craft, and then move to maybe saris later. So I think that's going to be the strategy for us going forward, going international.
Very, very smart product with our craft is something that we are going to be doing this year. So
Okay.
yeah.
That's something I'm looking forward to. Genuinely, I am.
Okay.
And so, you have chosen a very franchise-led model, as you've spoken about, for offline expansion rather than, owning every store yourself. So why did this model make sense for Suta, and how do you see, it helping other entrepreneurs, follow their passion and build a sustainable business of their own?
So when we started opening stores, we realized that it's very capex heavy. So we wanted investments, not and not blocking a lot of money in just one store, and working capital being an issue. So we opened it up, the floor up, and we saw a lot of people coming in and filling the form saying that, hey, I have never done business, but I've admired the brand and I love the products. So can I invest? And what's the way? Because I don't know how to run a business. So the model was FOCO, where they invest, but we operate the stores. We put the inventory, staff, and we run the business. They get a revenue share, and that model worked beautifully. And hence we replicated that, and people are very happy because one of them, their friends, and who invested two girls who invested in the business, the first franchisee partners, they opened the second business of their own, which is a library. So them getting a hang of the sisters, they've always looked like friends and sisters, and it's like beautiful bond like us, and they followed the brand from the start. And she also applied in Suta. Somehow it didn't work out that time. She said, what if I don't work with you? I become your partner. And that's how she came in. And now she's on to a second business along with her corporate job. So I think that they get a hang of it. They also start their own things. It's like a beautiful ecosystem now.
A lot of franchisee partners have taken a second franchisee store with us, third as well, right? So one partner is taking third store with us. So I think there is a lot of potential to work together with a lot of partners, like-minded people. And this way we are also growing together at the same time, not even diluting our stakes. So I think this is it's a win-win. It's a win-win, and also the cost of money is not as high as compared to the other modes. So I think it just makes sense.
Yeah. And also, building onto your family as well.
Yes.
The Suta family.
Yeah, I think lots of dreams coming together and the dream becoming much bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just a dream until you made it true. So, and finally, to come to the close of it, for young entrepreneurs who are just, starting out, or for ones who are just stuck in a job and they don't know, they're uncertain about the idea of opening their own business, what would you want to, what would be your advice to those people?
We've spoken a lot about numbers, and I'll tell you, numbers might look different at different scale of the business. But even when you're at zero, when you're growing from 0 to 1 crore, even then, even if you see couple of numbers, because most of the times people think that will just follow. Numbers never follow. Numbers are supposed to lead. They are supposed to be at the forefront and you need to follow numbers. So I think just be on top of numbers, even if they're just 4 core numbers that you're watching every day. Watch them, and the moment the business is changing gears, please change the numbers. What you're looking at, it should change to something else. So I think just making sure that you are on top of it, it's very, very critical. If a business is not making money, you should know it from day one, because you should know when to stop. So all of that calculation is very important when you're running a business, because people with business requires a lot more qualities than just being good at math. So it needs passion, it needs so much of compassion, it needs a lot of things. So with everything, this might just get dropped somewhere, but this cannot. So that's my biggest advice.
Yeah, I think another one is that hire smarter people than you. Sometimes you just are scared to do that they will guide you too much, they'll tell you too much. But, hiring complementary skills will let you to grow. Not that when business will grow, I will hire. You have to hire fast, hire before you see a growth, because that will lead you to grow faster. So that is one. And also having good networks, having them on speed dial, making them friends, not just for the sake of networking.
Yeah, we are friends with all our competition brands. So we know each one of them, and we can ask question, hey, is yours also so bad as ours?
Yeah,
And we will
having a founder friend who is into saris will really help you grow, and having them as genuine friends and them reaching out to you and being transparent with them about whenever they need your help. So that really helps. I think from the start, if you do that, it really works wonders.
When you just mentioned that, it reminded me, after giving exams, we used to discuss what the answers are.
Yeah.
And if the answer is like matching, okay, then ठीक है. And if it is like, अच्छा तूने भी गलती किया, मैंने भी किया, ठीक है. So it's fine. It's okay. So it felt just like that. So, just quickly gonna wrap things up. I will just ask you very quick rapid fire questions. So, ready?
Yes.
Okay. So, online or offline, where does Suta, win bigger in long term?
Offline.
Okay. So, one mistake that you will never repeat again as founders.
I would, when you write some rules about businesses, make sure that you've never crossed that. You've just not forgotten about it. Those rules should be watched, and make sure that you're sticking to it.
Yeah, they're non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So, a trend that in the Indian fashion that you see that you strongly disagree with.
Saris with heels, that fashion is uncomfortable. No, fashion should be comfortable. Fashion should be absolutely easy, breezy, and light.
Yeah, completely. Comfort first.
Absolutely. So, saris with boots.
Or shoes, boots, yeah, shoes. You have to be comfortable to enjoy your moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, a lot of people are wearing saris with sneakers also.
Because we are almost always seen in sneakers.
Yeah. So, you can run.
Yeah.
So, if Suta wasn't saris, then what category would it be?
Malmal. And comfort again, but something with malmal for sure.
Okay. And IPO dream. 3 years, 5 years, or only when it feels it's absolutely the right moment?
I think you also know the answer. Only when it feels absolutely right, that this is the moment.
That's what we've always done. When it feels right.
Go at your own pace, live your dream, and go on building.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Sujata. Thank you, Tanya, for joining us today and having this very candid, discussion and being yourself.
Thank you. You made it so much fun. We forgot the cameras.
Thank you so much. This conversation really shows that building a business doesn't always have to follow the loudest or the fastest path. Suta's journey is a reminder that staying close to your product, your people, your values can be a competitive advantage, especially in a crowded market. From navigating scale and profitability to choosing a franchise-led model and thinking carefully about what comes next. Sujata and Tanya's story is as much about restraint as it is about ambition. And thank you to everyone listening. If you enjoyed this episode, do follow Fortune India, the Disruptors podcast for more conversation with founders and leaders shaping Indian business in their own way. We'll see you in the next episode.